Why do you think that Private Eye have taken this attitude? Because they are saying in the report, basically, they're saying that this there is no such thing as ritual abuse or satanic ritual abuse.
I found it so disappointing because from my teens onwards I always liked Private Eye and always felt they were on the side of people being badly treated. So it was quite a shock, not just to me but to all the other people that work with ritual abuse survivors, to have an intelligent, satirical paper take the strange view that no such thing could exist. In the wake of the Kidwelly case, which was a very successful prosecution, in 2011, where 4 adults were convicted for the ritual abuse of vulnerable children, and where we've got lists of cases that have been successfully prosecuted, to say that nothing exists is creating the kind of climate that allows a Jimmy Savile to exist. In fact, one detective that did work for some survivors made the sort of wonderful point, all you have to do is put on a cloak and a mask and you can get away with doing anything to a child because people will say it can't be true, it's not real.
Now, you've spoken to 5 of Savile's victims. What evidence do you have that this is more widespread? You mentioned that Kidwelly case, but what about your own personal experience? Do you think that this is more widespread than we realise, this kind of abuse?
The kind of ritual abuse in a belief system, I've worked or heard from about 500 people in 25 years. And I'm assuming that from what colleagues are telling me that this is not a huge part of abuse. If you think that most abuse in the country, tragically, is within the family, it's incest, or near family, abuse within a ritual that is not, that is family or family and others, I would think is one of the smallest forms of abuse, but one of the most dangerous and damaging, because any child who has been abused is told not to tell and is threatened about what will happen if they tell. But it seems that with ritual abuse, children are told that if they tell, they and people they love will be punished in an afterlife. When you make a kind of religious threat like that, whether you believe it or not, and you're doing it and dressing up to frighten the children, the important thing is the child believes it. And that means that child, even when they're an adult and come for help, are still scared that something terrible will happen after they're dead because they've told on their abusers.
Now, obviously scores of people involved in some of these ritual abuse events where Savile was, and it seems very, very strange. There was very little and no action from the police and the BBC against him. Was he being protected, do you think, by people who were part of those circles, who were also potentially part of the police officers or maybe civilian police people or working for the BBC themselves? I mean, it seems incredible that over such a long time that there were no prosecutions when clearly people knew about this.
We've seen in the papers today with Stuart Hall, thank heavens, pleading guilty to the molestings he did in his period at the BBC. And we're also hearing through the reporting of the commission looking at the BBC that there haven't been current complaints. So I think there is something important that the nature of obedience and hierarchy in the 21st century and in 2013 is not so heavy as it was 20 years ago. That the way in which children felt they had to obey, and if grown-ups said don't tell, they mustn't tell, has changed. Similarly, if a boss is abusive, an employee is more likely to tell people or make a complaint. We're looking at where wealth and hierarchy join together, where somebody is a boss of others and has lots of money and mixes in powerful circles. There's greater fear in their victims in speaking out. So I think it doesn't need even a cover-up, that when people see somebody that's above them doing something wrong, they think, oh, maybe I'm seeing things, maybe he was drunk, maybe this is the only occasion, and they wipe it out of their mind. So something can be covered up, not through a deliberate cover-up, but because it's just so horrible to consider. It's no different in a family where grandfather is the head of the family and he's physically abusive, and people don't quite want to see it if he's powerful and wealthy and has a job that is highly significant. It's, oh, he's just a bit strict, or he's old-fashioned. There'll be excuses for it.
Now, in a way, Rupert Murdoch, I'm sure, is rubbing his hands quietly, because the BBC is getting an absolute drubbing over this. But we had a chap called Ben Fellows who was abused as a child on here a few months ago, talking about his abuse. Do you think this is something, and he was saying it's actually much wider in the entertainment industry as a whole? The idea is that it's kind of fame, and this is a big attraction to young people, and that this is used as a method of abuse. And I mean, you've spoken, you say, to 500 people or so. Would you agree with that, that the entertainment industry actually is a hotbed of abuse?
If we consider the government's own statistics that 1 in 4 people are likely to have been a victim of some kind of abuse, I think we'd find it was spread evenly, that it's wherever vulnerable children are, whether it's teachers, whether it's religious leaders, whether it's family members. It's a hard thing being a child. I think when it comes to entertainment, there is a complicated area of where you've got people that are, for example, really motivated fans of somebody that are above the age of consent, that would be utterly thrilled to be chosen by a singer to go off with them after a concert. And you're not going to have every person in a rock band that's just a few years older working out exactly when people are on the edge of an age of consent. So I think there's painful issues where somebody could do something at a young age, and 10 years later they can look at it differently. My goodness, I was only 16. How could I have gone to a rock concert and behaved like that? And how could that singer have not realized that I was young and I shouldn't have been doing this? I think they're very hard things there that are very different to paedophilia. And it matters that we are aware of the different seriousness of where a child's hope is destroyed to where a young adult has given in to a boss at work, whether it's a nurse with a doctor, a secretary with the boss, a fan at a concert. There are hierarchy things that are really difficult, and people need help with those. But unless somebody is doing a sadistic, planned, awful molesting of people totally against their wills, as it seems Stuart Hall was and Jimmy Savile was, there's a danger that people that were in a more grey area could get caught up in this.
Okay, if anyone listening's been subject to this sort of abuse, Valerie, or believes someone they know has, what should they do?
Well, there is something very, very important and positive about the U-Tree project at the moment. You see, one thing that's difficult with the police force is usually you have to go to the police force that are nearest to where the crime happened. And if there's an officer there that you don't feel you can tell or you don't feel has listened sympathetically, then you're in a real stuck position. But while the U-Tree project goes on, it has permission to look at things that are connected to Jimmy Savile or are other major names or are other cases where they might make a link with somebody helpful that is nearer to where the person lives.
Okay, Valerie, I suppose the final question has to be, what do you think can be done about this in the long term?
I think the more we consider that any child looking distressed, disturbed, has gone through something, and that we can have a question, what's happened to you? That when an adult is emotionally disturbed, homeless, in pain, something has happened. What is it? Once we start thinking, have they been traumatized? What could have happened to them? We make a climate in which it's easier for people to tell. And once people can tell, the culture of secrecy goes. Just having an open mind. No therapist I know that's worked with extreme allegations of ritual abuse even knew it existed, even had a view over whether they believed it or not. But when faced with it, we've had to see something horrible. The more people can consider that yes, there can be wrong allegations, there can be emotional disorders that make it hard for people to remember everything properly, but that if we know whatever the worst things are that have happened to people, it will make it more possible to tell.
Okay, Valerie Sinason, psychoanalyst specialising in trauma, also director of the Clinic for Dissociative Studies in London. Thanks very much for joining us on Drive Time.
Thank you.